Yesterday, we told you the U.S. and its allies warning that a hacking group sponsored by the Chinese Communist Party is a threat to global networks. It is a very important topic that we wanted to go deeper into for you. For example, what are the weaknesses in the U.S. critical infrastructure that allows cyber attacks to happen? I spoke to professional security advisor at My Smart Privacy, Rex Lee. Here's what he says. Okay, Rex, thank you very much for your time today. Now, Australia recently accused Chinese state-backed hackers, namely APT or Apt40, of breaching government networks. So I'm personally curious here, how do we know that this is a state-backed group?
Well, typically by the hallmark of the attack, a lot of the groups out there, whether it's Apt40 or other apt groups from China, or Russian nation-state hackers such as Sandworm typically will use the same attack methods. These attacks have real implications.
Now, Australia was recently in the news, but let's talk about the U.S. What kind of threats would this kind of cyber attacks have on Americans?
Oh, it'd be huge. These attacks have massive implications, not only on the economy, but within critical infrastructure. Most recently, Black Cat. I don't know if you're familiar with the Black Cat attack on health change networks associated with United Health Group, which is United Healthcare. That attack hit our medical industry, and so far, that attack, the cost of that data breach is north of $1 billion. This is going to result in changes for the insurance industry, as well as how these companies and these governments protect their critical infrastructure from these types of attacks.
Well, speaking of these attacks, in the context of cyber threat, what are some of the biggest weaknesses, would you say, in terms of infrastructure that makes the U.S. vulnerable?
Well, if you look, there's several things at play here. If you look at the weak links in the chain of communications, whether it's internet or telecom, all these global threat actors would have to do is target one of those data centers and take it down either through a cyber attack or a low-tech social engineering attack where you can basically use old school tactics and just blow it up. This means that we're hugely vulnerable to these types of cybersecurity attacks and social engineering attacks. And just those two companies alone, Microsoft and Amazon, if those data centers went down, about 90% of the economy would be impacted. Basically, you could shut the economy down with a couple of cybersecurity attacks or social engineering attacks on these data centers where everything is centralized today. These are the vulnerabilities that we need to be looking at within our critical infrastructure.
Final question, what are some ways to improve upon these weaknesses?
Well, you know, what really needs to happen is we need to be decentralized regarding these technologies. And within the operating system world, businesses can protect themselves by using decentralized operating systems, which are non-Android Linux operating systems that support smartphones, tablet PCs, desktop PCs and servers. These are some of the things you can do. These attacks have real implications, not just on our economy, but life and death. If you go back to the AT&T when they were down, FirstNet. AT&T is the company that runs FirstNet, which is the network for our first responders for disasters like in Houston. All of the first responders responding to the power outages in Houston are using FirstNet devices. Well, if AT&T is down, FirstNet is down. And you can see that it becomes a life or death situation. What we haven't seen regarding the AT&T outage, T-Mobile and Verizon outage, but mainly AT&T, are real data on who was hurt. If a crime was being committed while one of these outages was happening and violence occurred and people were hurt or accidents, or you needed to get a hold of a hospital, you can't do that during one of these outages. This was the case yesterday regarding Spectrum, because Spectrum also sells phone services along with their internet services, which means that a lot of companies, including several hospitals in San Antonio, were dependent on Spectrum for their phone systems. Their phone systems were down, not just their internet.
All right, so we wanted to cover all possible angles on this outage. So that is why earlier I also spoke to cybersecurity advisor at My Smart Privacy, Rex Lee, for more. All right, Rex, thank you very much for your time today, as always. You know, a lot has been said already about this topic, but what is your angle on it?
Well, you know, what's going on with the Microsoft CrowdStrike outage today is a direct result of what is termed as internet centralization. Well, a lot of people will say, well, how's the internet been centralized? Well, it's centralized through 3 companies. Today, there's only 3 companies that control global access to internet trade and commerce, and that's Alphabet, the parent company of Google, Microsoft, and Apple. And the vulnerabilities with that are single choke points out through the network that can take down millions of customers. So this is the problem, and this is exactly what happened today with CrowdStrike. A software update went out with a bad kernel, so we're being told. They're saying that this isn't a cybersecurity attack, but it had the same net result as a cybersecurity attack. And that bad kernel caused over 1 billion computers to lose access to back office systems supported by the company, because the companies that are involved, and also countries. We're talking about government agencies. We're talking about Fortune 500 businesses, airlines. Today, you couldn't even watch ESPN. They were down for a while. And they had their radio program on cable. So the cascading effects of this is unbelievable.
1 billion computers. Can you give us some perspective on this number?
Well, if you want to know what it's costing, if you just simply said we're losing $1 per second in productivity when you aggregate all of the computers and companies that are affected, and I think it's higher than that, we're losing $1 billion in financial transactions a second right now. This is unbelievable. You're talking about, like, with ESPN, advertisers who are losing advertising dollars because of this. And worst of all, if you look at critical infrastructure that's being affected, this is actually going to cause harm, and people may be dying as a result of this, because first responders are being affected, hospitals are being affected. We won't know the total damage from all this, but this is going to go down in history. If it hasn't already, it'll go down in history as the largest mistake and or outage in the history of the internet. I mean, this is unbelievable today.
Can you tell us if you see this internet centralization situation, is that going to get worse?
Oh, you know, the bad guys know this. When you talk about tech-based hybrid warfare waged by adversarial countries, they know this. This is the problem with allowing a handful of companies to control global access to internet trade and commerce. When I speak at seminars on this topic, I ask companies and governments, what's your cloud exit strategy or your centralized internet strategy for critical infrastructure? Because 20 years ago, maybe even less, 15 years ago, companies operated on local area networks and wide area networks, LANs and WANs that were protected, and the companies owned and controlled their own data. Today, they've moved everything into the cloud. And the cloud is not controlled by the companies necessarily. They control their own access to the cloud. But what's happening is the cloud is controlled by a few companies. Well, if there's a choke point within that infrastructure that can go down, it can cause 1 billion computers to lose access to their networks. And we're seeing that today. At one time, there was probably over 30, maybe 40 wireless carriers in the entire United States. Today, there's only 3. A lot of people say, well, you have Verizon, T-Mobile, and AT&T, but a lot of people don't realize that they own the infrastructure that Cricket, Metro PCS, Boost, and other carriers operate off of. So there's only 3 telecommunication providers basically controlling telecommunications, and we have that in the internet today. And these choke points, when they go down, everybody's being affected by this today.
As most of the world woke up Friday to a global IT outage, China breezed into the weekend with little disruption. Experts say this is partly because the very threats the cybersecurity giant is fending off often come from China. We spoke with Rex Lee, security advisor at My Smart Privacy, about what and where most cyber attacks are targeting. Rex Lee, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Tiffany, thank you for having me on the show.
AT&T is saying that hackers stole almost 6 months of everyone's phone records during 2022. That's around 95 million AT&T customers. First, what's your reaction to this and how serious is this?
Okay, this is a very serious matter because when you look at the information that these hackers took, first of all, AT&T is not being very transparent about it. Secondly, it's associated with your wireless phone services. And again, as we spoke about in the past, these companies like AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, all have apps that support your smartphone. So it's not just your phone records that they're collecting information on. Their apps are enabling them to collect your location information, plus highly sensitive user data associated with your personal information, your business information, your medical information, your health information, biometric information, and other highly sensitive user data.
Well, zooming out a bit here, where are most cyber attacks targeting?
The other day, there was a big cyber attack in Australia by Apt40. And Apt40 is a nation-state hacking group associated with China. Now, you can't say they're Chinese and run or in particular part of the Chinese military, but they're aligned with these oppressive governments. The same with whenever you hear of a Russian hacking group like Sandworm, it's the same thing, or Fancy Bear. These are independent hacking groups, more or less aligned with criminal organizations worldwide, including cartels, and they're targeting information to exploit for financial gain. And typically, what they're looking to do in a lot of cases, aside from targeting these companies to collect your information, they're also launching ransomware through the operating systems that support these endpoint devices, because they figured out the vulnerabilities within the Android OS, Apple iOS, or Microsoft Windows operating system. Now, this could be relevant to the AT&T hacks because a lot of these groups do not hack through firewalls anymore. They're able to circumvent the firewalls through the supply chains. These are considered insider attacks, and they're able to then get in behind the firewall either through the operating system and or the actual apps, because the hackers know today that they can get to you and get behind your network and circumvent your firewalls through compromising the operating system and the apps that support our smartphones, tablet PCs, connected products, and servers.
Delta Airlines has apologized to passengers for its widespread cancellations. That's after a massive CrowdStrike outage caused global chaos. Next, we delve into the dangers of internet centralization and the growing threat of tech-based hybrid warfare with Rex Lee, security advisor at MySmart Privacy. Rex Lee, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Tiffany, thank you for having me on the show.
Now, Delta Airlines has just issued an apology to passengers after the CrowdStrike outage resulted in over 2,500 flights canceled and over 8,000 delays. Now, given the chaos that gripped not just America, but the world with this outage, how does internet centralization play into all this?
So, first of all, when you hear the term internet centralization, and a lot of people are starting to hear this nowadays, how things are becoming centralized, that means a small group of companies or individuals are in control. Regarding internet centralization, it has been centralized by Google, Apple, and Microsoft through the monopolization of the operating system market and the global distribution of apps, social media platforms, and AI integrated products, meaning that they are really the gateway to global internet trade and commerce. There are vulnerabilities and cybersecurity threats that we're seeing regarding internet centralization. And one of those vulnerabilities examples was the CrowdStrike outage affecting tens of millions of computers. This is a choke point regarding the operating system that was mostly impacted by this.
Incredible. And given the interconnectedness of all of these devices and the choke point that you're laying out, in terms of this CrowdStrike outage, it was accidental according to reports, but how could this be used in terms of, say, cyber war?
So regarding tech-based hybrid warfare, which is a topic that we've discussed many times on this show, for those of you who don't know, tech-based hybrid warfare is warfare waged by our adversarial countries like China and Russia, where everybody is a target, whether you're an adult, teen, child, business professional, work for the government, in the military, law enforcement, everybody is a target that's connected on the internet regarding tech-based hybrid warfare. Now, if you think about these nation-state hacking groups, like App40 groups out of China, or Sandworm out of Russia, or Lazarus out of North Korea, or any of these other hacking groups out there, if they can expose and exploit these choke points, they can literally take down internet trade and commerce, and the ramifications are catastrophic, to say the least.
On a more personal level, what is the impact on civil liberties, say personal freedom, privacy, given all this interconnectedness?
The problem is we've allowed governments, including adversarial governments, into our phones and our PCs regarding the very apps that support these devices. So if I want to give you an example, when we talk about information warfare, if you go back 20 or 30 years, it was unthinkable for the Chinese government and the CCP or the Russian government to spread propaganda to, let's say, 2 billion people within a matter of minutes, or a matter of even seconds, when you consider how fast you can communicate on these social media platforms spreading mis and disinformation. Today, that is possible through these apps. The apps include Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and so forth. So when you think about these platforms supporting upwards of 2 billion people, the ability to spread mis and disinformation, you can touch those 2 billion people in a matter of seconds with false and misinformation. And the problem is people are getting their news off of the internet today, so they're believing what they're seeing without investigating it.
With the November election coming up, the FBI and DOJ are warning about Russian disinformation and interference. But what about other countries like China, Iran, and North Korea? Are they doing the same? To discuss, we sat down with Rex Lee, security advisor at MySmart Privacy. Rex Lee, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Tiffany, thank you for having me on the show.
Now, with the U.S. presidential election just around the corner, the FBI and DOJ are warning about Russian disinformation and election interference. Now, what about other adversarial countries like, say, China, Iran, and North Korea?
Yeah, this is common, and it's becoming commonplace that we're seeing more and more election interference associated with mainly social media platforms. This has been going on really since 2012 with the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal, which was based on targeted advertising using personal data that was collected through Facebook accounts. About 80 million people had their personal information collected through an app that was launched on Facebook by a Russian data broker, Alexa Kovic. Well, this is going on today, but it's much worse today because now you can spread propaganda and disinformation the same way that they were creating political ads and targeting people based on their personal information. Now you can use that same technology and then spread mis and disinformation on social media platforms, hitting millions of people simultaneously. Also, within the last 10 years, the technology to spread social media posts has also changed, especially with AI.
You've talked before on this show and other shows about unrestricted warfare or war by any means short of military might, where countries like the Soviet Union in the past or Russia today or Communist China, they try and divide and conquer a country from within and pit different groups against each other by, say, infiltrating different political groups or so on. How do you see that fitting into what you just laid out here?
The scenario that I laid out both with Facebook, Cambridge Analytica, and then now with Russia Today and Tenet Media, this scenario can be played out by any adversarial nation, including China, North Korea, Iran. They're doing it not only for election purposes, but they also do it for PR. For their countries. You know, everybody wants to win the propaganda wars or the PR wars. But now, since really Facebook, Cambridge Analytica, we're seeing these types of technologies utilized for propaganda purposes and the spread of mis and disinformation associated with political campaigns and politics worldwide. And that's where it gets really dangerous. They don't know that they're being used. And they don't know that that ad that looks so personal to them was actually created off of their personal information. And that may not even be the political candidate's stance at all. They're just trying to influence that voter.